Defense attorneys for a homeless man accused of assaulting former San Francisco Fire Commissioner Don Carmignani said they now have video evidence apparently showing Carmignani bear spraying a different homeless man unprovoked. According to the San Francisco Standard, the video taken in November 2021 is part of a trove of new evidence that has come to light that may link Carmignani to a series of at least 8 targeted bear spray attacks on homeless people.
Carmignani claims he was assaulted by a homeless man with a metal pole, on April 5th. However, charges against the alleged assailant were dropped yesterday. Prosecutors say they believe the man was acting in self-defense after evidence emerged that Carmignani bear sprayed him too. An attorney for Carmignani says the former commissioner vehemently denies he is responsible for these assaults.
So I watched that video footage, the footage from night, where it's clear as day, ironically, that the homeless person in that case is just laying in a kind of makeshift bed on the sidewalk, does not do anything to provoke any kind of confrontation, is out of the way, and Carmignani is carrying bear spray and real aggressively just sprays him. And now apparently he has a proclivity for doing that. He has a history of doing that. So I think it was probably the right decision for prosecutors to consider the evidence they had and say that was what looked like a very vicious, and was in fact a vicious, brutal beating. He put the man in the ICU, was actually self-defense because of his history of using bear spray.
And it should be clear that bear spray, a spray intended to deter bears, is very, very dangerous. It can cause a lot of severe reactions in human beings, and even in some cases has resulted in death. So it's a very serious thing to do to somebody. And when this happened, the context of the story that you really have to appreciate is that conservative outlets, the New York Post, blared big headlines about what an injustice had been done to this ex-fire commissioner. We shouldn't also miss that this is a public employee that's entrusted with the public health and public interest. Blasted headlines, ex-fire commissioner describes smashed jaw and skull from San Francisco crowbar attack, DA declined to prosecute, and was really part of this narrative about how dangerous San Francisco is and how the district attorney, the prosecutors there, are more interested in, Black Lives Matter or whatever, than they are in actually bringing people to justice. And so this does seem to be another big hiccup in that narrative, following also the revelation that the tech CEO who was murdered by a friend of his, and not, as many people presumed for the intervening weeks, by a homeless person. And so I don't know, at a certain point, are we going to stop to give a little bit of space to folks to let the information develop, to ask if prosecutors have a good reason for not prosecuting a case, that they're looking at evidence or suspect that there is evidence that the victim in this case, who wasn't actually a victim, was actually the instigator in not just this one instance, but apparently a repeated series of attacks on homeless people?
Well, if you're trying to go after, the idea that violent crime is rising, that should be one way or the other. Has to be based on, rigorous statistical analysis, not one-off incidents, one way or the other. I think I'd agree with you that maybe there's been a focus on one-off incidents. And, we don't know if, the other week, we talked about 3 really horrific, unprompted, violent assaults on people, which fit a pattern of our news coverage for that week, but we have no idea if that kind of thing is getting more common or less common, or what it follows or correlates to, if anything. So I would say the same for a lot of these crime stories. Both of these incidents are still incidents of crime. They were just they're not incidents of
it's middle class or wealthy guys attacking either each other or the homeless for these two cases. Obviously,
we don't know that is.
But that's the thing. We see other instances, and we say, well, there's a pattern here.
I don't say there's a pattern here unless I'm looking at the data.
The people, there are, conservatives who are really cherry picking instances to make claims about the rise of violent crime in various cities. Now, as we've discussed, violent crime is up in some cities, it's down in other cities. Gun violence is up in a lot of red states in a way that isn't discussed. It's down in a lot of blue states.
Your beloved local news does this
Right,
ritualistically
crime,
as well.
And crime sells, but what is it doing
If it
to
leads.
our society? I mean, I had a friend, I was scrolling my feed recently, and a friend looked over my shoulder and was like, why is your whole timeline like people punching each other in like race fights on the street? You know, woman calls woman the N-word, and so they get into fisticuffs. Like my timeline, like there's so much on
my timeline
Instagram about that stuff. I said, I don't know,
Instagram?
but it does feel to me, yeah, people put TikToks on Instagram. I'm old, I don't go to TikTok, but I watch TikToks on Instagram. But there's so much of the
Mine
news
is all clips
coverage.
from Family Guy and people playing Dungeons and Dragons. Go ahead.
There's so much news coverage that is clearly geared toward making us feel antagonistic against the other. And
that's nothing new, though.
No, it's not nothing new, but it's something that I think people should be aware of and resisting, because now there are political actors. I mean, there have always been to a certain degree, but political actors right now, particularly in the Republican Party, have realized that they can capitalize on those kinds of frustrations, feeling that the world is changing too fast, what's really going on with transgender people, yada, 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 as a supplement for substantive policies, where you look at their actual constituents and you ask, what do you want? Well, 60% of Floridians voted for a $15 minimum wage. These policies are very popular. People want health care reform. 57% of Americans want a wealth tax. You don't have to talk about any of that if you can animate people on these other kinds of priorities.
I mean, if you poll them about whether they're concerned about crime, they will also say overwhelmingly that they are.
So the government should do something about crime. But what we've seen is throwing this money at police departments isn't doing anything. It has no correlation to lowering actual crime.
Now, whether it works and whether it's popular are two different things, right? Poll people. I mean, giving more money to the police is probably overwhelmingly popular.
Well, the poll that I cited was about a policy, a wealth tax, which people support, but there's no political appetite for.
Funding the police is also a policy.
Well, you didn't ask about funding the police. You asked about a poll about whether something needs to be done about crime, and those are two very different polls. And it's not clear to me that what the funding police poll is like from locality to locality. Also, I do think people, including a lot of Democrats who've completely dropped this issue and turned tail thinking that it's a bad one for them, have acquiesced to the notion that increased police funding does yield to less crime. So, of course, if the Democrats are saying that and Republicans are saying that, if people like Kathy Hochul and Eric Adams are saying that and Republicans are saying that, well, if polled, voters are going to say, well, yeah, let's give police more funding. It'll lead to less crime. Everybody's telling me that's true. So there's some political responsibility for everyone, I would argue, across the political spectrum, if you sincerely care about crime.
Right. So only 18% of respondents support defunding the police, according to this poll.
Right, but if you poll people on whether or not they think more resources should be going to preventative measures, housing, food, education, et cetera, that are known to lower crime, many people, much higher percentages of people support
We've argued about this before, but it depends how you're spending the money on police. Obviously, giving police more like SWAT team toys is not going to make any difference. Mm-hmm. There have been studies. My understanding is even people I know who are big supporters of criminal justice reform, not like pro-police, tough on crime people at all. My understanding from talking to them is that one does need to acknowledge that putting more police on the streets in high crime areas does reduce crime, but that's what they tell me. So you seem skeptical, but.
I mean, I can't speak to polls I'm not looking at.
Yeah, but I'm not talking about polls. I'm talking about studies.
I can't speak to studies I'm not looking at, but I know there are a lot of studies that show how much the crime rate goes down by giving people money, making sure people have jobs, making sure there's after-school programs, making sure that people have good education.
After-school programs would be great.
That parents can be home after work because there's someone who either one parent makes enough to be the sole caregiver, or there are caregiving services in the community that aren't expensive. Child care is like $2,000 a month, and poor people that's just not accessible.
Yeah, one way or the other, keeping the age group that tends to find itself potentially succumbing to areas of dangerous or antisocial behavior if they are distracted by social supports, extracurricular activities, more supported school, jobs, employment, all of those things. If only there were a place where you could send off a bunch of 18-year-olds where they could be away from their communities in an educational environment, in a dorm where they could be taken care of and looked after all the time by responsible elder people,
what's the word for that?
Yeah,
college. I wish more people could afford
Or what's the word?
to go to college. I wish, in fact, there were a publicly funded college system, just like high schools are publicly funded, so every American had the opportunity to go.
Instead of waiting until they're 25 to contribute meaningfully to society, they could get jobs that teach responsibility, give them income.
There's a great study about that, about how many kids want to be, I think it was electricians, how many young people very much want to go into vocations because they're very well paid. But the problem is that the basically union structure for a lot of these professional unions like electricians, it's cheaper. They benefit from there being a backlog of requests because obviously they can keep going, and it costs them to have to train for these apprenticeships, so they basically don't have anybody coming up the ranks, and they don't want to dilute the numbers.
Sounds like a union problem.
So it is. It's a business union problem, and there's a lot of corporate capture in all of our institutions, and it's a fundamental problem. Yeah.
More Rising right after this.